We spending too much money. That's our problem. But one of the things I have to show you in this video in part 1, and this is just the intro. I know it's long, but it's just the intro. Part 1 is coming up right after this. Now, one of the things I have to show you is where we came from, what we were before we were prisoners of war. I like to say prisoners of war, not slaves, because we didn't just jump on the slave ship. They didn't, white man just come to Africa and say, hey, niggas, get on the boat. And we said, okay. No, it was a war, and we lost. So prisoners of war, like I said. And people got to see why we are where we are and what happened. I want people to know, because they're not teaching you this in school. They're not teaching your kids where they came from and what their people were before they came to America. You don't know this. So I want you to see, because it's very important that you know the truth. Then once you see this, you will understand a lot more what's going on, why we are in the position that we are still in today, why we haven't made any progress really, why we haven't come close to equaling white people in success. We haven't come close. They are surpassing us every year. And it's crazy. Why? When we built this country, we've been here. Why? How is that possible? So I have to talk about that first. Then I'm going to talk about money, because we are owed a lot of money, and I'm going to show you some things about money that you did not know. Is going to blow your mind. Seriously. It's very important that you see this. But before I get into part 1, I want to leave off this long ass intro with a beautiful message from George Carlin.
Because I got to tell you the truth, folks. I got to tell you the truth. When it comes to bullshit, big time, major league bullshit, you have to stand in awe of the all-time champion of false promises and exaggerated claims, religion. Think about it. Religion has actually convinced people that there's an invisible man living in the sky who watches everything you do every minute of every day. And the invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do. And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish, where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you. He loves you and he needs money. He always needs money. He's all powerful, all perfect, all knowing, and all wise. Somehow just can't handle money. Religion takes in billions of dollars. They pay no taxes, and they always need a little more. Now, you talk about a good bullshit story. Holy shit.
Now you can turn this video off and keep on believing the lies they want you to believe, or keep on watching and see how deep history really is once you learn the facts. Now, and I like to use the Matrix analogy a lot, because the story is about the awful truth about the world. Neo thought he was living a normal life, but he felt like something was wrong with the world. It wasn't until he met Trinity and she brought him to Morpheus that he found out what that wrong thing really was. But he didn't really believe that it was that deep. In fact, when Morpheus tells him the truth, he still doesn't want to believe it. He wants out. Morpheus also tells Neo that they don't usually free people at a certain age because the mind is so hopelessly dependent on the system. And for Neo to really embrace the truth, he must first get rid of all of his fear, his doubt, and disbelief to free his mind. Which brings me to my point. In order for you to truly believe and understand what I'm about to show you, you must forget the popular lies that have been told to you about history. First, we are told that America was occupied by native Indians and that black people were brought to America from Africa as slaves. One thing I want you to think about: the Indians' lifestyle was almost identical to African lifestyle. We was both looked at as primitive savages. So why didn't they just enslave the native Indians instead of going through the trouble of bringing the Africans all the way from Africa to America? The answer to that is this. When a white man got to America, he didn't just find Indians. He found Africans as well. See, the Africans and the Indians were at war because the Indians wanted some of the Africans' land. So the white man and the Indians struck a deal for the Indians to help capture and enslave the blacks or kill them. Now, it's a known fact that Indians owned slaves. So if the white man and the Indians were at war and the white man was the only people who had African slaves, why would the white man sell slaves to the Indians? See, it was a team effort, and at the end of it, they sat down to thank the Indians for giving them the land, and they ate dinner, which we call Thanksgiving, and they betrayed the Indians. See, the thing about that story is this. The real native Indians, as we come to know them, were really the black people. See, when we think about native Indians, we think about these Indians with their headdresses that have a bunch of feathers on them, that's walking around half clothed with tomahawks, looking all crazy. But what they were doing was mimicking what they seen the Africans do. The real native Indians were black people. They were the Africans. We just come to know them as Indians. And the story goes, the reason why they're called Indians is because Columbus, when he was sailing, he thought when he reached America that he was in India. He didn't know that he was in America. So they called the natives Indians because he thought he was in India. Or so the story goes. But the truth is, the real Indians, the real natives, were the Africans. And we know at some point the Africans seem to have breeded with these, what we know today as native Indians. You always hear a lot of black people say, I have an Indian in my family. And we always joke when we hear people say that, but that's true in a lot of people's cases. A lot of people, you can trace your descendants back to mixed race between the Indians and the Africans. Because at some point, when you look at the story of the Seminoles, we know that this to be true, that at some point, Africans and Indians joined forces against the white man. And once the Indians seen they was double-crossed and how much the white man was taking over their land, they had no choice. See, the white man knew that other countries would start to come to America and try to claim some of the land for themselves. So they had to betray the Indians so they can have as much land as possible before the other countries came over. In some cases, they completely wiped out whole Indian tribes. In other cases, they made deals with the Indians where they purchased land. Now, when you think about it, the Native Americans are a prime example for white men coming in and completely changing a people's whole civilization to their way of life and their way of thinking. Now, the Native Indians don't have to pay taxes, and Jews got reparations for the Holocaust, but blacks can't get a penny for hundreds of years of slavery, and there's a reason for that, but we're going to get into that later. But first, I want you to meet the Olmecs. Now, these giant stone heads were found all over Mexico and in America. There are also pyramids in Mexico. There are also pyramids found in the Grand Canyon and all over America. Now, these Olmec heads were determined to be of African descent. Now, they didn't just find these Olmec stone heads, they also found bodies, which were also determined to be of African descent. But the true story is covered up, and the credit is not given to the Africans as creating these giant stone heads. Now, they also found large African civilizations in America. They also found vast underground civilizations that was also determined to be of African descent, which is why most national parks and places like the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone are protected by the government, because they don't want you to go do any digging and find out what's really there. Now, when they find these pyramids in America, the credit is always given to the Native Indians. When they find these underground civilizations in America, the credit is always given to the Indians. The official story is always the Indians put this here, but I guess the Indians also created the pyramids in Egypt. Now, this kind of sort of explains the hush money or the lack of paying taxes that the Indians get today. What you got to realize is they're not going to release the true African history to the public because that's going to spill the beans. The history is really covered up. It's a lot of scientists, a lot of archaeologists who have came out and spoken the truth, who tried to reveal to the press what's really going on and how much of a large contribution that the Africans have in America. But they are met with ridicule, and some of them are silenced and even killed.
According to Mayhem chapter 3 and verse 9, he says that the people from Ethiopia and Egypt had a power that was boundless, limitless, without limit. And that was written in 714 BC, right around the same time that Isaiah 18 was written. So what we're dealing with here is that we're dealing with a group of people, black people from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, that were basically presidents of the planet, if you will. People who were in world domination. So on one hand, slave trade. On the other hand, we have the tremendous civilization that black people had created.
There was a definite crisis of the conscience, because there were white brothers really intensely fighting this thing called slavery, and they were pushing for the liberation of the black man, condemning the trade itself, and freeing slaves in America, and they were torn. And so you can see where the impetus and the need to formulate rationalizations for this developed.
What to do? What are the anthropologists and archaeologists going to do in dealing with this information? And that is what I believe, what sponsored, maybe consciously in some cases, unconsciously in other cases, what we could call the cover-up. The cover-up of the accomplishments of black people. Chancellor Williams wrote a book called The Destruction of Black Civilization. And in this book, he outlines 7 points as to why he feels that there was a cover-up.
Ignore. Just refuse to publish any facts of African history that don't go along with our racial theories.
We need to create a religious and a scientific doctrine so that African slavery won't appear that bad after all.
What we need to do is flood the world with new African histories that contain our European perspectives only.
Start renaming people and places. Replace African names with Arabic and European names. This will disguise their true black identity.
Let's change the criteria for defining race. For example, 1 drop of Negro blood in America makes you a Negro, no matter how light the skin.
Yes, and when reporting ancient African history, reverse the standard. No matter how dark the skin, woolly the hair, or thick the lips, you don't have to be a Negro.
When black contribution to civilization is too obvious, let's find a way to attribute it to outside white influences.
When all the ancient historians contradict your theory, we'll just discredit them.
Chancellor Williams was a scholar, and we feel that his observations have a lot of merit to them. But there are his personal observations. Talk about the rewriting of history. We have to set that in the context that we're talking about during the 1800s is when this started. We're not really talking about contemporary scholars primarily when dealing with this subject. You could not go from Egypt being a Negro civilization to being a white civilization without rewriting it.
Now, there's a lot of information, so I'm going to get right into the important part. The Egyptian Empire was the greatest empire to ever exist. No empire would have been as great as it was if it wasn't for the Egyptian Empire. Now, their original name was Kemet, but we know it today as Egypt, which Egypt comes from the Greek Egyptos, meaning black land, Egyptos. The Egyptian empire had skills and knowledge that we still do not possess today. Black people were the most powerful people on the planet. Other races came from all over and seen and marveled at the pyramids and the structures that were sitting there in Egypt. And they wanted to learn from the Egyptians. They wanted to learn how to communicate with them. And so the Egyptians obliged them and taught them things and taught them how to communicate, taught them things like alphabets and taught them how to count in their language. Now, the Greeks came over in peace at first, but what they really wanted was to learn the secrets of the Egyptians. They wanted to know, how did these Egyptians build these pyramids? How did they build these structures that were sitting there? Because at this time, there was no other structures that rivaled, that you can compare what was going on in Egypt to. There was nothing like it on the planet at all. So they wanted to know, how did these people build this structure? What was the secret? Now, the Egyptians only taught their secrets to grand masters, to people who was in their secret society. They're the only ones who know the knowledge of sacred math and sacred geometry. So they didn't teach the Greeks what they wanted to know. Now, if you look at this map, you'll see how close Greece is to Egypt. It's not that far away. Now, once the Greeks learned enough to communicate with the Egyptians, they began to worship the Egyptian gods and the Egyptian pharaohs. They worshiped black people. Now, I'm going to prove this later on and show you a lot more on it. Now, once the Greeks learned enough, they came to conquer Egypt. And in 332 BC, Alexander the Great, or Alexander the Greek, he came in and conquered Egypt. When he died in 323 BC, Ptolemy I Soter became pharaoh. Now, the Egyptians were interrogated brutally, and when they finally gained access to the secret places of the Egyptians, they didn't recognize or couldn't read any of the writings. And they gained access to areas and they found thousands and thousands of papyri full of ancient writings and ancient teachings of sacred math and sacred knowledge that they could not understand. And no Egyptian would not teach them. So they started killing Egyptians until the first sellouts came out. And they said, okay, we'll teach you everything. We will show you. Now, when Alexander came into Egypt, he created a city called Alexandria that's still there today in 332 BC. Now, when he died, Ptolemy I Soter named a library after him called the Library of Alexandria. And he took all the papyrus, he took all the ancient writings and all the ancient tablets to Alexandria, Virginia, and they studied them and they learned the information. They learned sacred math, they learned sacred geometry, they learned how to build. And once they learned all the knowledge, once they learned everything that they could possibly learn, which they thought they could possibly learn, they destroyed the library. They burnt it to the ground with all of our ancient writings, all of our ancient teachings, all of our ancient scrolls were burnt, destroyed. And they did exactly what the Egyptians did. They created a secret society and only passed down the information to people that was a part of the secret society. And with that knowledge, they used that knowledge to control the masses. Now, Masonry started with the first Grand Master Imhotep, who built the Pyramid of Saqqara for the Sultan Zojar 2,000 years before Solomon even came about, and even longer before the formation of the first Grand Masonic Lodge in 1717 in Britain. Now, once he got the knowledge that the Egyptians had, he wanted to be worshipped as a god. He didn't want the white people seeing these black people as gods. He didn't want them worshiping these black gods. His name was Ptolemy I Soter, which Soter means savior. Then he created Serapis. How he did that was he took the god Osiris and the god Apis and got Serapis Christos, the anointed. Now, remember when I told you that I would tell you who Jesus was talking about in Matthew 24 verse 5, when Jesus says, many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. This is who he was talking about. He was saying, many shall come in my name, in Jesus' name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. But what he was saying was, I'm not Christ. Ptolemy I Soter is Christ, the Savior. Christos, Serapis Christos, the anointed one. This was the first Christ. The worship of Serapis was going on long before the Bible or any Jesus or anything about Jesus came into play. The worship of Christos, of Serapis, was going on. Look at the photo. Compare the photo. You have Serapis and you have Jesus. That's where they got the image. Now, the Council of Nicaea is the council that convened and changed Serapis into Jesus Christ. So what they did was they took the Egyptian mythology, they took the pictures off the wall, and they plagiarized the story and created this new story involving Jesus Christ, who really was Serapis, you know, the Pharaoh of Egypt. They changed everything around. They changed the story up. And it's still there. Don't worry, I'm going to show you proof of this. And they added all these beautiful stories and all these stolen stories into the Bible you have right now. And really, it's all stolen from off the Egyptian walls. So, of course, eventually, they got the white people to start worshiping this God. But it didn't happen easy. The white people didn't want to let go of their black God. They've been to Egypt. They seen what was going on there. They knew. The stories got passed down. So, they got another sellout. The first Pope, he was black. Pope Victor I. They used him. Now, they want to deny that he was black, but he was black. He was born in Africa. They used him to go to those white people and tell them, hey, no, don't worship these black gods or these black people who y'all used to worship or who your ancestors worship. The real God is this Jesus Christ. This is the real God. He looks like you. He catered to their ego. And of course, the black people wasn't having that. We were slaves. That's why they shipped us out of Europe and took us to America, because we were known there. We knew where we came from. We was in our motherland. They had to take us out of that place into another place that we did not know and indoctrinate us, change us around, and they did so. Now, Egypt fell victim to a lot of floods. There were always floods going on. So you had floods and sandstorms and floods and sandstorms. And over time, Egypt was buried in sand, almost completely buried in sand until it was discovered again. And Napoleon was the one who blew the nose off. Now, once Egypt was discovered again, they had to go in there and take everything out. They had to try to cover up the blackness of Egypt. But see, at that point, they were already well established in the world, so they wasn't so worried about getting rid of the blackness because they had already established their power on the world, the Catholic Church. So they chiseled off the noses and chiseled off the lips. That's why you see all these Egyptian statues and pictures. The nose is always chiseled off, while the lips is chiseled off. That's not an accident. That's why Napoleon blew the nose off the Sphinx, because they couldn't take it. They couldn't take when they saw that the greatest civilization in the world was black. It was Egyptian. It was created by black people, not by this white God or these white people as the world has been told. Now, it was fitting for them that Egypt got buried in sand, because they didn't want nobody going into those pyramids or going into those structures and seeing that proof, seeing the blackness of Egypt, that Egypt was black and not white, that it was ruled by black people, black pharaohs, not white pharaohs. So it was fitting for them that it was covered in sand. Now, once they got in there, of course, they had to change things around. They had to get their story straight. But it really didn't matter at this time because they were in such control. Now, they used the knowledge that they stole of building, of sacred math and sacred geometry to build all the beautiful structures, all the beautiful palaces and beautiful cathedrals all throughout Europe. They used the knowledge that they stole. They used our knowledge of philosophy, our knowledge of math and geometry to create a beautiful ruled world, ruled by the people who stole from us. The Greeks were powerful. The Romans were powerful, of course, we know. And then you had philosophers start popping up like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, who had this knowledge, but nobody could find out where they got this knowledge from. They just popped back on the scene with this knowledge to build, this philosophy. But nothing existed like the Egyptians before the Egyptians, or during the time the Egyptians reigned. Nothing rivaled them. You couldn't compare what they did or what they had to anything on the planet. Everything came after they were taken over. So that is more than enough proof to tell you that they stole from Egypt the knowledge. They stole from Egypt the knowledge of building, the knowledge of sacred math and sacred geometry. And that's why they have all the beautiful structures in Europe today. Now, we're going to get into this and look at some more proof. And I'm going to show you, you'll see for yourself what black people need to know. What they don't want black people to see over there in Egypt. What they don't want us to know about our history. And you will see where they stole from Egypt and what they put into the Bible where it really.
Our story has been persecuted, and persecuted in a way that we look at it from a European perspective. And what I'm trying to say is that the pyramid right here in Giza, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, this pyramid is 7 million tons of masonry. 2,300,000 stones put in exact position. Why do I say that? Because we are told that the pyramids are made out of mud and straw. Now, you are right here at the pyramid. The outer casing of these pyramids are 5 tons each, and the inner casing are 50 tons each. This pyramid of Khufu is built in the 4th dynastic period. There were no people at this particular time called Jews who built the pyramids, and definitely not Mackenbagen. Mackenbagen is an Ashkenazi Jew from Poland, and he stood here right where you are now and said his people built the pyramids. But he's able to tell the world that because of the power that they have inflicted upon other people to force that story on other people. So we come back here to tell the truth. Now we have one of the few pictures of Khufu right here. Now, when you get to the museum today, you're going to see a small picture, a small statue of Khufu. It's the only thing left. Although we have the largest building here, the smallest thing of Khufu is in the Cairo Museum. So we're talking around 2,400 years BC. So we come back here for an eyewitness account, and let's go up closer so we can feel the stones and touch it, because you're actually feeling the stones, the master builders of your ancestors who built this. And I'm saying somebody knows something about us that we don't know about ourselves and definitely don't want us to know. Sinro-Ret I. Here's an African here who set up the kingdom of Athens. Not only that, conquered into southern Russia, what is called Black Georgia today. I often wonder if that's why they call it Black Georgia, because of this African here in Sinro-Ret of the 12th dynastic period. Sinro-Ret I, who conquered into Europe at this particular time, and this huge colossal right here going back to the African origins of civilization. Now, Maspero, as my wife pointed out about, he's one of the top psychopathic races. Now keep in mind, the Cairo Museum, people come from all over the world to read this. But first of all, before I read this, let me show you this man right here named Maharpura. This is Maharpura right here, the 18th dynasty, giving praise to the great god Asuru, who the Greeks call Cyrus, sitting in his canopy, just like the Pope sits in his canopy, right? This is where they got the concept of the canopy from. But everything to deny you your history, this is what Maspero says about Maharpura. Let's read it right here. It says right here that Maharpura suggested that, Maspero suggested that Maharpura may have been the son of Thutmose IV and a negress. There were no negresses 3,000 years ago. At any rate, on a copy of the Book of the Dead found in a tomb and now exhibited on the wall of this room, Maharpura is depicted with his face black instead of the normal red. They were also the normal black. A detailed examination of his mummy, which showed that he died at about 20 years of age, also showed that he was negroid, but not actually a Negro.
How did you do that?
Now this is psychopathic racism at its best. So Maspero made it a point to make sure that he would plant in all people's mind, he's negroid, but not actually a Negro. What is a negroid, but not actually a Negro? That's like saying he's Caucasoid, but not actually a Caucasian. Everything to deny the African story that's told right here in the African Nile Valley. Negroid, but not actually a Negro. So I want to point this out to show you the forces that we're up against, the forces that we're fighting. As I said before, many years I've come here, and Amenhotep III that you see right here was in the front, along with all the other Middle Kingdom pharaohs. And I came a year ago and I noticed that he was missing. I didn't know where he was at. And it wasn't until I came back, after searching throughout all the museum, I find him in the back corner. In this back corner with pieces that you see are broken up. He is a major pharaoh of the 12th dynastic period. A time of high literature, a time that it was known as the second golden age of Kemet. This is a brother who took and built the pyramids in Hawara. This is the brother who made the black capstone put on top of this pyramid that you just saw. But why is he in the back corner? But you're going to see Nefret and Rahotep those two figures, once you see them, you'll recognize them because you see them in all the books in America. That's who they show you, who were irrelevant, who were not pharaohs, who did not build major sites and so forth, and one even questioned if they had anything to do with this. But we got to question, why is Amenhotep the third all the way in the back room, in the back corner for no one to see him, where he's been systematically moved out of the way? And I'm saying that this brother built his pyramid, like I said, in the area of Hawara. He's known as building the labyrinth, which is a very elaborate structure. Many rooms were in this labyrinth. So all the things that he did, but the racism of the Western world, this is where we have Amenhotep III. But you see his nose had been knocked off. This is what we're saying. Like I said before, there's no one prototype that defines an African facial characteristic. Look among us, we have all types of facial characteristics, nose structure, and even color. This is what made us truly the people who we are, the mothers and fathers of the planet Earth. But systematically, the ones that got wide nose, thick lips, have been systematically trying to erase it from the public's eye. So now we see Amenhotep III is in the back corner with other relics, and we have to come back in the back corner. And when we get around to the other side, I'm going to show you where he once stood at. So we have to understand that there's a serious psychological, intellectual war going on. And it's a serious war that's just as vicious as having our children in the classroom where the psychological war takes place, especially when that educational institution is controlled by someone who does, or other people who doesn't have the best interests of our children nor our people at heart. So come on over here, Joseph. Listen, yeah, we've been doing this. Let Joseph come over here for a minute. Here's Amenhotep III living right here today, Brother Ken Joseph. Look at Ken Joseph here, and look at Amenhotep III. Go ahead, hold your head up high, brother. No, look at us. We know. All right, okay. Now you can get your shots in right now. Brother gonna charge you for that shot too. Now you can see the gene is still passing on. So we got to take Joseph down to Hawara one day and see that pyramid as well. The first thing that you'll see on Egypt, many of you have seen Rahotep and Nefret. Rahotep was not a king. Nefret was not a queen. They did not hold the throne in ancient times. But it seems as though they are in all of the books in Egypt. It's the opening of the page. Now keep in mind that African people are many colors. I've traveled throughout the African continent. There are many shades of color of African people. But the point that I want to specifically point out here is the fact that Nefret and Rahotep are the ones who stand out in all the books. So when you get the books, they have selectively gone through here and have, as we know in America, a thing called passing. So they have systematically passed certain colossal pieces and so forth and artifacts. So Rahotep and Nefret are the ones who stand out in all the books. But when I showed you Amenhotep III, who should be standing right here because he was a pharaoh on the king, on the throne, who made the world's oldest road, built a pyramid in Hawara. They were not pyramid builders.